Good morning, Sabah al-Khair, Guten Morgen. I'm so pleased to be here today and to talk about my passion, which is the Palestinian culture of identity. I'd like to, as a coincidence, coming here, I sat in the train next to a lady, a young lady, very young lady, and I thought she must be Arabic, and so I asked her, "Are you Syrian?" She said, "No, Palestinian from Syria." Oh, and then we started to talk about her experience to come, and then I asked her, "Would you like to go back to Syria?" She said, "No, I'd like to go back to Palestine." So I thought, I told her I will add this in my presentation now as actually about the question of identity, of Palestinian identity in particular, is very unique and had haunted me since childhood. And I'll tell you my experience in a while, inshallah. This conceptual piece of exploratory research aims to recognize the self-identification of Palestinian refugee children in Jordan, to examine its reflection on the peace process in the Middle East. This study will use the narrative stories and four categories of generations of Palestinian refugees from Al-Wahdat refugee camp, which is, we'll see how it is particular as well, Al-Wahdat refugee camp in Jordan. Misunderstanding of Palestinian identity will lead to flawed political approaches on dealing with wider issues. The improved understanding is a better basis for analysis of political actions. Often practical mistakes in political actions are based on a wrong understanding of situation. Importance of the study in quotation from Al-Khalidi and Al-Husseini and many other, failing to directly address the four core elements of the conflict: Jerusalem, borders, water, and refugee. After more than 30 years of negotiations of the beginning of the peace process, still we didn't even started negotiating these four aspects, is the reason for the current stagnation in the peace process. Overview of what I'm going to present today: the introduction, my story, research question, literature review, turning point in Palestinian identity, Al-Wahdat refugee camp, the generations, different generation, testimonials, Al-Wahdat identity, the team, the deal of century, conclusion, and recommendations. I hope it will not be boring, and I'm trying to simplify as much as I can our complicated issue. But when we refer, as Dr. Cohen stated, to culture, the identity, that things will be easier, because this is without cultural diplomacy, it means we have wars, and no way wars will take place anymore. I don't think we are capable even, or willing to. Now my story, my starting point concerning identity. This is, I told you, I'm inhibited of the story of identity because childhood experience. I'm sure each one of you remembers the first day he went to school. My first day I went to school, my father, by the way, I'm not a refugee. I was not directly a refugee because my father comes, my family comes from the part of Palestine was occupied after 1967. So my father left Palestine after the Nakba. Nakba is the creation of Israel. In Arabic is a Nakba, means the catastrophe. My father left with thousands of Palestinians, experts, educated, to the Gulf, because the Gulf was Arab Gulf states, was flourishing petrol, and they needed expertise. So my father, many Palestinians, that was the first wave of immigrants to the Gulf, of the experts, Palestinians, highly educated, who has established the medical system, educational system, infrastructure of the Gulf states. And then I remember on the first day of my school, my parents, both of them in one time saying to me, if somebody asks you, where are you from, don't say you are Palestinian. And they didn't even told me, they didn't tell me what the alternative. Just keep it blank, ignore the question, don't say it. From that day on, whenever I was asked this question, I have to look around. Is it the right time to say what, when? Is it safe to say Palestinian or not? Is it acceptable? The hiding this, somebody is nodding because I know she went through this. Hiding this is not because we are persecuted. No, not at all. But Arab regimes at that time, they didn't want, please don't disturb. They felt the enthusiasm, no, I mean their people, all the Arab people were in anger, and they wanted revenge, and they couldn't take the humiliation happened. A precious part of the Arab world was lost in a joke, and they felt the responsibility there. And they didn't want that. And just to mention, all Arab military coups started after the Nakba, after the Palestinian, the creation of Israel, as a reflection of the losing of Palestine. All in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq, and assassinations also took place in Jordan and Lebanon because of people, the same people of the country, not the Palestinians, were angry for what happened of their regimes. So they tried to change the regimes, the royals to military, and it failed again, unfortunately. So that was my first experience. Then the 1967 shock, it was a shock for the whole Arab world. Also, I have many stories about it, but I still remember my uncle came, and we were still in Saudi Arabia. I was 9 years old then, and he was saying, yes, we are going back to our fields in Jaffa. First time I feel, we are not in the same right place. We have to move somewhere else. We are waiting to go back. So displacement was a part of my upbringing. Then life in Palestine, another rich experience when I lived in Palestine through the Intifada, latest uprising. And so many things happened. I can tell you endlessly. I raised 3 children there with going to universities as a student, as a lecturer as well, with all the difficulties we faced under occupation. But the peak point that also changed me and turning point in my identity feeling was when during the incursion of siege of Ramallah and Yasser Arafat in his headquarters. Ramallah was the city I was living in, and Yasser Arafat was. It was under siege totally and under curfew totally. We were all in our building, 6 apartments. The soldiers, tanks, several tanks and several jeeps coming into the building. They occupied the whole building, not the whole country, the building. They chased us, dragged us all 6 families to one apartment, gave 1 room for women, 1 room for men and children, and we were, for there, I call it the 30-hours experience. We were there, no explanation what happened. They stayed the whole night. It was freezing cold, and we spent a whole night, day and night, on that 2 rooms with a toilet and a kitchen. That's it. I have a long story about interactions, but the most significant is the reaction of children. When children, at the beginning, it was a shock for them and a fear, yes, I can't deny that. But then, when they closed the door behind us and they told us, keep silent, no, we don't want to hear you. They gave us half of one apartment, and we stayed there. They closed the corridor taking to the bedrooms, the 2 bedrooms they gave us, and we stayed with no explanation whatsoever. What happened, if you see the children reaction, they were just hilariously laughing, joking, as if they are, I was wondering, and we were really trying to put them, please keep silent. Every time the soldier knocks on the door telling them, shh, we don't want to hear you. Well, you will, literally they said it, we will explode the building. And they keep on laughing more and more. And what's happening? I felt this is their the only way left to them to resist is to laugh and annoy the soldiers behind the door. So that answered your question. Yes, this is my second article. The first one was Palestinian Culture of Identity, one about Palestinians in 1948, or in Israel, as identity, and so on. So this is my story. Research question: after 7 decades of their displacement, is self-identification and connection to Palestine still a relevant question for refugee children in Jordan? How does denying the right to return to Palestine is guaranteed by an international UN resolution 194, 1950 was, to guarantee Palestinians to go back to Palestine? It was never applied yet. Represent the main hurdle resolving the conflict and refuting any final solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Approach. The study will follow a relative inductive epistemology to understand the meanings of refugee children, identifying perception and the strength of their connection to Palestine in the context of the camp and the children's living experience. I will, my unique way is how I collected the data. I combined the primary data with secondary data. I made interviews. Actually, I started this research before COVID, 2019, and started interviewing the children going to visiting the refugee camp of Al-Wahdat, and I really enjoyed the time learning from the children there. By focus groups and one-to-one interviews, and still, it's, as I told you, it's an ongoing research. And then the other way, the narratives. I'm going to take narratives and produced by the writers, authors, cartoonists, and cultural sports activities from Al-Wahdat itself, people who are in Al-Wahdat. Literature review, belonging, the definition of belonging, fitting, feeling, feeling at home, feeling as part, and another definition of belonging is the position, holding something and objects closely associated with one deepest notions of identity. Antonish studies the sense of belonging in 2 levels, اللي هو personal and intimate feelings of being at home in a place, belongingness as a discursive resource that constructs claims, justifies, or resists. I don't like to talk about literature review because it takes a long time. I'm sure you are not very interested, but these are definitions to easy understanding. Identify formation studies through the concept of narrative, why I'm using narratives, motivate the emergence of widespread identity politics and social construction of identity, Somers, 1994. In the novel of Hala Alayan, also the narrative of Salam and Mahfouz studied the intergenerational memories of Arab immigrants in the US and focuses on the trauma effect on the generations. Suzanne Abul Hawa, famous Palestinian writer, American Palestinian, stories matter. We are composed of our stories. The human heart is made of words we put in it. Edward, the great Edward Said as well, every Palestinian achievement is flawed by the paradoxical truth that the survival outside Palestine is ruined in a sense by its importance, its groundlessness, its lack of specifically Palestinian sovereign will over the future. Is Palestine a utopian homeland? What I'm talking about? Most of you don't find it on the map actually. But we have it in our hearts, in our memories, in our culture. And Bloch, utopia he identifies utopia as expectations and hope. Mahmoud Darwish diagnosed the Palestinian people as infected with an incurable disease, hope. So hope, which is materially grounded, progressively functioning, future forming, or what Bloch calls dicta specs, or educated hope. It's not only hope, we are going towards that hope. And I believe my study and other studies like this is part of the education of that hope. Narratives reveal how individual imaginative insight can be a long-standing belief in creativity as a form of resistance. Why children? Because I'm taking the juvenile, we call it, or young adults from 12 to 18, because psychologically, according to Erickson, This is the adolescents explore their independence, develop a sense of self-identification. Birzeit University published a book in 2012, Palestinian Refugees, Different Generations but One Identity, concluded that there are significant differences between the generations. However, it recommends further exploration of the question of these differences. What is a refugee identity? Rosemary Sayegh, 2012, she gave it the terminology Palestinianness, because we are very particular, which is a combination or merging between hard identity and soft identity. Hard identity is the official authoritarian registration, which mainly for Palestinian refugees is the UNRWA or the regimes they are covering. Soft identity, subjective identity, which is self-belonging or self-identification, results of lifetime experience and shared aspirations. Rashid Khaldi, I hope this is the last quotation, so I won't. The Palestinians might put up with humiliating and unequal agreements based on ignoring history in the economic sphere, in the area of security and other domains, but it's hard so to visualize them standing in an attempt to pretend that the refugee issue does not have specific historic roots and can be resolved accordingly. It's so central to the international narrative and the self-view of the Palestinian people that any approach which tries to sweep history under the rug will fail utterly. I identify the identity, the formation of the identity of Palestine and some other writings in 4 stages. First of all, humiliation, losing their homes, literally their homes, and their land, and being refugees. It was feeling at 1948, feeling humiliation and deceived and let down by the Arab regimes. And this is, I can talk about it hours later on. Revolutionism, that's after 1967, it was a very massive, it has effect on the culture of the Palestinians and the Arab world much more than the Nakba, by the way. The Nakba, people still had hopes that it's gonna flip, but after the Naksa, it was the 1967 war. These definitions, from my point of view, for a European, I'm 100% sure it's the creation of Israel, the 1948. So I'm presenting our point of view. So 1967 and the creation of the PLO, thousands of young men, highly educated, went to, streamed to join the PLO. For many of them, and many they had to drop the humiliation of being a refugee and to get the identity of freedom fighters. That was the main reason. I know Shafiq al-Ghabra, he's a highly educated, the son of a highly doctor, physician in Kuwait. He left his Georgetown University and came, joined the revolution. Hanna Mikhail, he was a student in Harvard, and he was killed in Lebanon later on, unfortunately, and thousands because of the identity issue. They don't want to have the tarnish of being a refugee. Then the other wake of the identity was the Intifada, or the Uprising in Palestine, 1987, which they call them, we are the sons of the stones. Then the later one is the Arab Spring generations, which I interviewed, and I will show you examples about them. Al-Wahdat camp, established 1954 by the UNRWA, and now they have 70,000 inhabitants, is the powerful, is the powerful symbol of Palestinian nationalism from the rise of the PLO in 1960s until the expulsion by the Jordanian army in early 1970. Al-Wahdat had attained a quasi-complete political autonomy from the Jordanian state. It was a state within the state, Palestinian state. And this is one of the graffiti in Al-Wahdat. no for written there, no for alternative homeland. Then, and this is, I will talk about it, then here is the Exodus camp, يعني saying it in a pride, here is the Exodus camps. Interviews, I made interviews based on the 4 categories that I mentioned earlier, 1948, Al-Nakba, Al-Naksa, Intifada, and Arab Spring. And I divided the generation based on the main event that took place, 1948, 67, 87, and Arab Spring. These are the years of birth that I calculated that by to identify people who were juveniles at that time. So if I interview a man who's 70, I will ask him about his experience around the creation of the PLO and what he felt, how the PLO presented his identity and so on. Testimonials from the generations, first generation, I never believed or imagined that I will not go back to my home again. I was always ready to fight to return. I never expected to live in a rest of my life in a refugee, as a refugee. I still have the key to my home in Jaffa. Someday one of my grandchildren will return back and live in dignity on our land. Dignity. Still, we don't identify it as dignity. Testimonial, second generation, Ibrahim Nasrallah, prominent novelist. I never, in his latest book or autobiography, he said, I never let my childhood go away from me. Many monsters roam around. So feeling insecurity still with second generation as well. Third generation, Imad Hajjaj, he's the prominent, famous cartoonist. I think the Le Monde, they always take his cartoons. And he is, of course, he didn't do it these cartoons while he's a child, but I have an appointment with him after I go back to Amman, to Jordan, to interview him more. But I'd like to, he's from Al-Wahdat as well. And this is his explanation of all the arrangement of the Middle East, the chess that with stones, with resistance, with peaceful resistance, I consider the stone, will face all the dangers and all the plans that are coming. The second is also right of return, because the right of return, there is a proposal that, to give compensation, financial compensation for the refugees, and so he shows the right of return. It will the third cutting. Fourth generation, and I would like to show you a video. Bear with me, the sound. I will make the sound lower because it's very noisy.
No, I can control it from here.
You can, a little bit, please, because you can read the translation. These are the refugees in Al-Wahdat camp, in the soccer team. They are the young children of the team of Al-Wahdat. Oh, they can't see it. How can, why it's not showing?
But this depends on your PowerPoint. Can you see it on your screen?
Yes.
Strange.
No, we have the PowerPoint there.
Okay.
You need to share it.
Yeah, you can see it.
المسح اللي بقى يلغيها
اللي بده يعملها.
الحمد لله التغت.
من وين سمعت عن صفقة القرن انت؟
عقد صفقة القرن. الحمد لله ربنا لغى لهم اياها. صفقة القرن هاي بقوا انهم يبيعوا الاقصى. بس الحمد لله ربنا لغاها. المسح اللي بقى يلغيها.
اللي بده يعملها.
الحمد لله التغت.
من وين سمعت عن صفقة القرن انت؟
أنا من الجامعة في الجمعة.
الجزيرة والهدم.
كان في شيء بصفقة القرن كانوا نص الشعب منخدع إنه صفقة القرن مو بيع الأقصى، إنه بيع إشي، يعني إنه مثلا في أشياء في أراضي بفلسطين بس تبيعوها، يعني بعدها بترجع لكم، يعني بس خلص الاحتلال الصهيوني. كانوا يعطوا لكل واحد $30,000.
طيب بتاخذوا $30,000؟ لا. ليه؟ تشتري سيارة أحسن سيارة.
بلدنا أحسن. عندهم سيارات.
هي بلدكم ما أنت قاعد هون.
عندهم شيء.
نعم.
بس ما دام إلنا حق فيهم مش رح نترك.
نعم.
ما دام إلنا حق فيهم مش رح نترك.
بس $30,000 محرزين.
لا.
ليش؟
ما بيساوي ولا شيء.
وانا $300,000.
لا. كمان.
قبل أسبوع اعتقلوا ولد عمره 4 سنين. كان رمي على اليهود خدار. في اسمه اسلوب الحوار، يعني تقدر بس تشرح معلومتك من دون ما تسب عليه، يعني هو يعني كل ملك بغلط، كل ملك
هو غلطته كبيرة ما حسب حساب اللي وراه.
طب بدل ما تحكي عن ملك السعودية احكي عن ترامب.
ترامب هذا واحد شوارب بس.
حاسب انتم القيام ليش ما دفعنا عن بلدنا؟
طب انتوا بتدافعوا بايش بتدافعوا؟
لا بحكي على كلام مزيان.
انت كيف رح تدافعوا عن فلسطين؟ طيب شو بتعملوا عشان فلسطين؟
أنا عندي سلاح واحد، هاي إيدي والصلاة والدعاء لفلسطين والحجر.
اوكي.
بس احنا رح نحارب لين نموت. اخر شيء رح ترجع لنا فلسطين سلمى غانم. لو مش لأبهاتنا وأمهاتنا لإلنا، لو مش لإلنا لأحفادنا، لو مش لأحفادنا لأحفاد أحفادنا.
This is a sample of the 4 generations that are now going to be the future of the Arab world. I think it's not only the Palestine. And let's go to our presentation. I think now I can't move back. How can... Yeah. We are all Gaza and the map of Palestine there. Okay. Now the turning point in the identity of Palestinian identity is after the Arab Spring, or after mainly the proposal of the alternative homeland that Jordan will be the home of Palestinians, and that is the solution that was always comes into political proposals. As we can see here, we can affiliation to Palestine became to the camp itself, which is, I need to study that more and more. And when I wanted to fall in love, I fell in love with the camp. So that needs certain وحدات identity. It was, I will summarize because of the time, it was neglected. It was a unit by the UN, and it was never urban planned until 2002, which related the academics think that it is related to Oslo, after Oslo agreement and the Arab Israeli-Jordanian agreement. So they wanted to open a big, to split the camp in a big road into 2 parts, and the people started to make resistance for this because they wanted to move people from their homes. Splitting the camp described, but the people of the camp are serving political motive. They thought it's a serving political motive, and to scatter the camp and waste the cause. They thought they connected with wasting the cause. This is what we talk about. Samira, for example, one resident of the camp, it's true we are temporary here, but we will not leave the camp except for Palestine. We will hold our places here and the social weave we share in the camp, because this means that we steadfast to our cause. People who accepted the deal to leave or to take money in compensation were shamed and traitors of the cause, they say. The significant thing about the Palestinian identity of the camp, and I will explain now, الوحدات soccer team, which was established 1965, in its red and green color, created a new identity for almost all Palestinians in the region. الوحداتي means I am a وحداتي, I belong to الوحدات, I'm from الوحدات. So it started to have وحداتي identity, and I will show you now, became a symbol of their identity for all Palestinians in Jordan, either in the refugee camps or outside it. Now I'll show you another short video, very, very short video, but I'll show you a high-end wedding in Amman, with people who are not refugees, who were never refugees. In the wedding, they are celebrating another. So this is your, this is the, yeah.
Is that?
That's my nephew's wedding, by the way. I'm sure they are not refugees, at least them. This one. Yeah. So that's the turning point I'm talking about. Now I'll discuss the deal of century, how it's reflecting on one of the solutions, but from the Jordanian point of view, and which is, I think the Jordanian will play the major part in failing this this initiative of the deal of the century. There is a famous writer, a Jordanian businessman living in the United Arab Emirates, published an essay in Foreign Policy recommending that Jordan re-annex the West Bank, and he was met with a storm of objection from either Palestinians and Jordanians. Former Jordanian Prime Minister Samir Rifai, no to abandoning the guardianship of Jerusalem and the holy sites, no to the one-state solution, and no for Jordan to be an alternative homeland for the Palestinians, and he's officially figure. Many Jordanians believe that the alternative homeland conspiracy is an Israeli plot to bury the Palestinian cause, transform Jordanian into Palestinian state, and destabilize the Hashemite kingdom. These are other opinions. Barari, Zionist idea resembling the Jordanian option that was rejected by King Hussein before. Lamis Andoni Arguet, a writer, she wrote, would create new demographic realities that would exacerbate strife inside the kingdom. Maslamani betrayal of Jordanian and Palestinian principles. Batayna playing with fire. Quran terminating the Palestine cause. Jindi, it's an invitation to a civil war. Zawati, coming catastrophe to Jordan. In conclusion, in Jordan, the identity expression lapsed from the humiliation of the statelessness, 1948, to streaming to enroll in as a freedom fighters in the PLO, to dropping off the identity of refugees in 1964, to identifying the Sons of Stones and then the Arab Spring. Recommendation, technical approach, studying the Palestinian identity, a new methodology, combining narratives with interviews, interviewing different generations, relating it to their experience in history. Different approaches will give wider knowledge of and understanding of the self-identity expression of children of Palestinian refugees, connecting each generation identity expression to the major political and social events that shaped his or her generation. And that's it, thank you. Maybe the recommendation is not. I hope I was not long. No. Now we take questions.
Dr. Barghouti, very cordially for this really deep, passionate, and authentic presentation, which not only makes us aware of the reasons why identity politics is so much feared in the centers of power, when it is identity politics, when it is authentic, and when it results from the experience of denial of rights and alienation of people over so many decades. I do not know how much time is left for...
Two short questions and short responses, because Dr. Diab is waiting.
Yeah, because of the schedule. So if there is anyone who would like to make a comment, please.
Sure. So first, as a comment and then a question, is that possible?
Please introduce yourself too.
Sure. So first, my name is Baha. I'm from Lebanon. Lebanon. Yes. So my first comment, first of all, thank you, Dr. Samar, for being here and sharing Palestine story. I think just for ICD, I wish, of course, in the future we have more stories about Palestine, because I felt this democracy forum had been focused on a lot of things, but also we forgot about Palestine, which have been oppressed for 60 at least years and more. So I hope this for the future. And then the second question is, first is the US, for example, you have noticed it after the peace treaty with Egypt and Jordan. After their peace treaty with Israel, they have received from the US the most foreign aids for them throughout time, and until now they still do receive them, which probably favored, let's say, Jordan and Egypt to play around favor with what the US would want. My question here is, do you think this have impacted, or at least silenced, a little bit of the countries around around Palestine that favor Palestine to become, let's say, a two-state country, and instead right now we have delayed this kind of idea of having two-state. Until now we don't have two-state, even though it was long, but this is just because of what the US has been done behind the scenes, and I would like to hear your opinion on this.
I would like to ask you a question. This American aid, what do you think of Jordan and Egypt economically now? They are people are not changing. Actually, they are supporting the Palestinian cause more and more, even because of they were promised of prosperity, peace. But I know people. I had my PhD in Egypt. People in Egypt, they say we are ready to go to war and get rid of this poverty we are in, humiliation we are in. Egypt became, well, the least influential country in the Middle East. So it's the chemistry in the Arab world, it's not functioning well with the peace process. Yani it's because they always ignore what the people aspirations. Either in Jordan, I'm telling you, there is a big resistance for the homeland alternative, and I'm telling you, I rely on Jordanians. And those people, they don't trust me. They can't express these ideas without the approval of the regime, expressing what the regime wants. Even if the regime make the deal, but he knows his people and he knows how to move his people, and so on. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you.
And if there is one more, please, then with the time.
Hello, my name is Jaydeep. I'm a student at ICD and I'm from India.
أهلا وسهلا.
I have a very short question. We know that the anger about the lost territory of Palestine is completely justifiable and natural, but don't you think that this anger, or rather a bit of hatred penetrating amongst children, don't you think children getting radicalized is a bit dangerous for the future of Palestine itself? Did
you see hatred? Did you see the lesson of discussion from the young boy? He's telling to his...
I wouldn't call it complete hatred, but then I think these topics are also out of the league of the children, but they are also being exposed because of the situation, but don't you?
And did you hear that they got their information from the mosques?
Yes.
Okay, and from the daily life. If you go to the refugee camp, you will definitely understand why they feel the same.
I know, it's completely justifiable, but looking at the future, like 20 years down the line or 30 years down the line, we have seen that whenever in any part of the world, if children are exposed to such realities, and if they constantly think about defeating a cause or something like that, they tend to get radicalized. Do you see this as a threat?
No, they are not I assure you, they are not radicalized. They are informed, and they know, not really very, for their age, they are informed, and this is natural. They didn't take, I always say when they say, answer this, somebody is stepping on my foot, and he's telling me, love me, let's share our thoughts, our cultural diplomacy. Okay, fine, I'd love you, you are my neighbor, you are, remove your foot from your, and then we can talk. So tell these children to remove the stepping on their foot, and then take all the, and I think there is another video for the children. They said, doctor, we are, miss, they call me, we are very prominent Palestinians, educated, they built the Gulf, all the engineers and doctors, they went to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, they know, but and they know they deserve a better life of what. And another question,
These kids aren't normal.
Can you speak louder? We don't hear.
These kids aren't normal children. They're living in a refugee camp, so of course they're gonna be aware of the situation, and we have a different life. Of course they're gonna have questions about why they're living in a refugee camp and stuff.
No, I completely understand that, but I just was looking at the.
No, I don't.
And I was just curious. What do you think?
That's what I believe.
I think we are short of time now, really, and we have to conclude this very interesting discussion, which could go on for
forever.
Days. But let me just recall what the United Nations policy is. The General Assembly of the United Nations has established a committee for the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. And that committee continues to operate and to propagate the Palestinian rights, also in terms of the rights of the people to return, and in terms, of course, of every nation's right to a cultural and national identity. And in that regard, the main challenge now is how to conduct this process of raising awareness also globally, how to do that in an organized and systematic and rational manner that does not threaten a global peace, because the issue of Palestine is the core issue in the wider Middle East and affects the entire global situation.
100%, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.